So you're suggesting in a way that when we are so disconnected between the mind and the body, and if we're so focused on our brains, on understanding things only intellectually, or on trying to manipulate things with our rationalizations, that basically we can accept anything, and arguments and logic, or apparent logic, as well as very seductive, convincing, illogical ideas have quite the sway on us, because we're not actually grounded in our whole being. We're only playing with half the deck, in a sense.
Exactly so. It's much less than half the deck, in fact, because the brain, I would say, it doesn't even really represent 50% of the whole story. So it's less than half the deck. The brain, of course, is an important organ, perhaps arguably the most important, but whatever, that's irrelevant. It is what it is, and acts how it acts. And, science seeks to learn how it works, and so we have great strides in neuroscience, like we talked about in the conference last month, great strides in neuroscience, great strides in our understanding of psychology. What Dad has to offer is that although he's a trained medical doctor, and in fact a trained lawyer as well, he started from the body. As you and I talked, I think, at the conference, his approach very much was from the bottom up, whereas most other scientific academic disciplines take what I characterize as a top-down approach. They work from research and empirical data and theories and applications and proofs and that sort of thing. Dad's approach was really, as most therapists are, of course, beginning to work. The patient comes in, presents a problem, and then you work to solve that problem. Now, what Dad contributed, which comes out of his background of working with Wilhelm Reich, who really was, I think, the first person to recognize the linkage between trauma and the direct effect on the body. Back in 1930, in the 30s and the 40s, in fact, this goes back 75, 80 years. And Dad began working with Wilhelm Reich in 1943.
Well, I'm going to hop in for a minute and just let our listeners know that we're talking with Frederic Lowen, and when he's referring to his dad, that's Alexander Lowen. And I met Frederic about a month ago at a conference in Kingston. It was a Mind-Body Approaches to Treatment and Wellness, the Wave of the Future conference. And we're talking about waves that began long ago. With Frederick's father, and longer ago than that, with our human bodies. So go on.
And so, just to pick up there, when Dad would have a patient come in with a problem, Dad would, taking up from what he learned from Wilhelm Reich, would begin to work directly with the body. And he would look to see what the quality of the person's breathing was, what the quality of their energy was, their ability to make contact with their eyes, and the quality of their voice. All these things have to do with a person's ability to express themselves and to interact with the environment. People who have problems have limitations on their ability to express their feelings or even to feel their feelings. And Dad, building on the work of Wilhelm Reich over 60 years, has developed techniques and exercises to help people gain more of themselves, is how I think it's best put. And in the course of gaining more of themselves, they achieve a greater aliveness in their lives, a better connection to their lives, a better connection to the relationships within their lives, and more intensity of feeling. All right. And this is, as I say, this is not a product of an academic exercise. This is a product of 60 years of solving people's problems and working with people directly on the body level, and of course, as psychoanalysis would, of understanding what the nature of the thoughts and the behavior and dreams and the fantasies and anything else that's going on intellectually. But as I say, I think the brain and the intellectual side may not even represent half of what's important. The body really represents at least half. And out of this work, I think Dad, certainly to my satisfaction, has proved the existence of, as I called before, the mind-body split, which to varying degrees is a widespread affliction within all of our developed countries, perhaps most so in the United States here. And so to answer your question a little bit, with respect to the overcharged intellect and the overemphasis on the importance of what we think and our ideas and that sort of thing, we do become seduced. And we begin to imagine ourselves as being able to do all sorts of different things, and we begin to live more and more into our heads. And what becomes important then are what I term ego values. And the ego values are all those nasty things. It's the love of money, and it's the need for power and wealth and superiority and that sort of thing. And that's what makes somebody who's really living in their head feel good. And, to make a big deal and make a lot of money or to show somebody up or something like this. That's a product of living in your head, living up to your own self-image, which is not a reflection of your true body and your true self. Okay? And I'm describing a person there who is typically a position in power, a psychopath. Unfortunately, in government and in business today, many of the top positions are occupied by people who I consider to be psychopaths. They have some serious problems, and you can see it in the way they pay themselves, despite the fact that maybe they run the company into the ground, maybe they run the country into the ground. And yet, it seems to me as though collectively we're helpless to even see this. The media certainly doesn't see it. They celebrate people like this. But this is an example on, of why we have, in my opinion, such trouble with the politics in this case. You touched on another aspect of the insanity of the way we do business here. I mean, take, for example, all this discussion about the low tax rates of the super wealthy, those who are earning not just $250,000 a year, but millions of dollars a year, $10 million a year. And despite the fact that they've had lowering income tax rates for the past 12 years since President Bush was in office, they are lower now and have been lower in these past 10 years than any time since 1929. And it's resulted in the kind of economy that we have. And yet, guess what? People, the media, right-wing, politically oriented people, they still believe that we tax these people too much and we should lower their taxes. I mean, this is just one example. It's a complicated thing. You can't tease out this one thing and say, it should be the other way. But it's just an example of how even in the face of the evidence that it hasn't worked, they still talk about it and they still present it. And it still becomes the subject of our paralysis.
We're speaking with Frederic Lowen, who is the founder of the Lowen Foundation. You can go to lowenfoundation.org. That's OLOWEN, foundation.org, and check that out. This is WVKR 91.3 FM Poughkeepsie. And Frederic, you wrote an article that's on the website, lowenfoundation.org, about your favorite holiday, Independence Day. And indeed, in that you said, independence is dependent on one's ability to accurately sense and perceive and act appropriately upon one's environment. It's a feeling sense. It is not a reasoned position based on ideology and emotional hot buttons. To act appropriately, one needs to stand and speak out with openness, vulnerability, and understanding. It is only in collaboration that people can solve their problems. With collaboration, solutions may be simpler than most imagine. So that's quite a proposal right there.
Yeah, well, I stand by it.
So how do you see, not that I expect that you've got a whole political platform here, but that Independence Day is your favorite holiday, and that you do have strong opinions and are happily willing to stand your ground and speak them with openness, vulnerability, and understanding. How do you see that ways that other people can begin to do that more and more?
Well, that's really the bread and butter of the bioenergetic work. It is a feeling thing. It is a body thing, and people can approach it on their own, or they can get assistance in the form of therapy as well. But I think it's really it's a bit of a step process. I think the first thing is to get to know yourself. And when I say that, I don't mean from a conscious perspective. I mean from a body perspective. And it's important to get to know how you breathe, for example. Do you breathe fully, or do you breathe partly, or there is a lot to it. And to do this work, it's while there are people who have been successful in getting a lot of value out of the books, for most people to get a real experience and understanding of this work, it does take experiential work, typically in a workshop or working with a therapist or that sort of thing. But basically, what's important is to get better in touch with yourself. And in bioenergetics, we believe and have shown that the only real way, or the most effective way, perhaps, to do that is to get in touch with your own body. And in order to do that, you have to begin to feel the restrictions that maybe have been unfelt for you for years and decades. They may be restrictions in your breathing that are caused by childhood experiences, or they may be, there are so many aspects to life that are important. Your breathing is very important. What we call grounding, your connection to the ground, the vitality in your legs and how it extends down through your feet, and the actual feeling sense of your feet on the ground. That's something that you cannot get intellectually. You have to really see for yourself. What is your own level of grounding? What is your own level of energy? Energy, of course, is related to breathing. A lot of people who have low energy have difficulty breathing. Why do they have difficulty breathing? That's the work of the bioenergetics. And oftentimes, the difficulty in breathing or the difficulty in standing and being independent has to do with fear and the experience of painful experiences in the past, most often for all of us to some degree in childhood, but they can also obviously be in the form of PTSD in the case of a returning veteran. They can be related to an automobile accident or some horrific experience somebody has when children are lost in an accident, or a spouse or something like this. All these are traumas that not only affect the mind psychologically, but they're also registered and recorded in the body. And these experiences need to be released. The body absorbs them, and then the first step is to get to know them. And that's the first step, to get to know yourself. And unlike traditional psychoanalysis or any one of a variety of talk therapies, we have the additional tools to work directly with the body, which, of course, is where the feeling comes from. Okay. And so the first step towards I'm trying to answer the question here, how can one stand for themselves and be a more alive person, be more connected with life. That's really what we're talking about. I mean, you read what I wrote, and that's all true. But it's not just about standing for independence. It's also about, standing up to your spouse when they need to be stood up to, or it's about supporting your child even though they've made you angry. And it's about having self-possession in circumstances, and it's about knowing where your emotional hot buttons are so they don't get pushed. You can't ever get rid of them, but if you don't know them, they will control you. You will not control them. And so this is all a process of getting to know oneself via the body.